Hello and welcome to 1.1.6 free market economies, mixed economies and command economies. We're going to start off with writing down the destination questions which we have here, and we're going to start working through these. You can see that on the unit bar on the right hand side. We are at the final lesson on this unit, so we'll be doing an assessment soon. Okay, so in this lesson we're going to be looking at the distinction between free market, mixed and command economies, and we're going to reference Adam Smith, who we already know as being a Scottish economist, and then Friedrich Hayek and Karl Marx are going to be introduced a little bit as well. We're going to look at the advantages and disadvantages of free market and a command economy, and we're also going to look at the role of the state in the mixed economy. Okay, so in a free market, the economic decisions are made by individuals and businesses. These are controlled by market forces, the demands of the consumer and the supplier of the businesses. These market forces will ensure growth in the economy as prices are set to be competitive and supply is such that the business maximises sales. It's a system where society benefits from both businesses and consumers behaving for their own self-interests. As I said, consumers will make decisions to ensure their own welfare is satisfied, and producers will allocate their resources to maximise their own profits. So in terms of factors of production, owners of land will maximise their rent, businesses will seek to own more capital, giving them the capacity to produce more. Labour will benefit from remuneration and payment to ensure they're being paid competitively. Enterprise, or those who organise the production, will seek to maximise their profits by producing what is demanded by society. So the characteristics of the free market will include private sector ownership. This is clearly the opposite of state ownership. The market mechanism controls the market, leading to free enterprise with minimal government intervention. Firms compete for market share, which in turn drives down price for the consumers. Equally, society compete for employment and good salaries. And the allocation of resources is determined by market forces. The supply of producers and demand of consumers, and not by the state. So as we know, Adam Smith is an 18th century Scotsman who is known as the father of economics. He believed that in a free market there was an invisible hand which effectively self-regulated the economy as a result of market forces. As already discussed, the self-interests of the producers and the consumers would benefit society as a whole. Watch this short clip to help your understanding of the invisible hand.
60-second adventures in economics. Number 1, the invisible hand. An economy is a tricky thing to control, and governments are always trying to figure out how to do it. Back in 1776, economist Adam Smith shocked everyone by saying that what governments should actually do is just leave people alone to buy and sell freely among themselves. He suggested that if they just leave self-interested traders to compete with one another, markets are guided to positive outcomes as if by an invisible hand. If someone charges less than you, customers will buy from them instead, so you have to lower the price or offer something better. Whenever enough people demand something, they will be supplied by the market, like spoilt children, only in this case everyone's happy. Later free marketeers, like Austrian economist Friedrich Hayek, argued that this hands-off approach actually works better than any kind of central plan. But the problem is economies can take a long time to reach their equilibrium and may even stall along the way. And in the meantime, people can get a little frustrated, which is why governments usually end up taking things into their own more visible hands instead.
So this is a famous quote from Adam Smith referring to the benevolence of the various traders and how it's not their kindness that we get our dinner, but more for their own desire for wealth. The laissez-faire principle expresses a preference for an absence of non-market pressures on prices and wages, such as those from discriminatory government taxes, subsidies, tariffs, regulations of purely private behaviour, or government granted or coercive monopolies. In The Pure Theory of Capital, Friedrich Hayek argued that the goal is the preservation of the unique information contained in the price itself. Here are the advantages of a free market alongside disadvantages. As you know, it is likely in an exam on this topic, it is likely to expect you to argue the advantages of something, but being aware of the disadvantages too in the evaluation. So advantages include a competitive market which leads to consumer choice and also rewards entrepreneurship. Innovation is encouraged by the invisible hand as it is required for businesses to compete. Equally, the profiteering of the business owners, efficiency is sought. All of the above lead to economic growth. The disadvantages of a free market are as follows. Inequality of wealth, as the business owners are likely to exploit labour with low wages and in turn leading to their own profit. The government or state do not regulate as much as they would in a command economy or mixed economy. There is provision of demerit goods, which are those that are deemed bad for society. An example of this would be cigarettes. There is little control of negative externalities. A negative externality exists when the production or consumption of a product results in a cost to a third party. An example of this is air and noise pollution. An example of the state taking some control of this is the introduction of the low emission zone. So Friedrich von Hayek was a famous free market Austrian economist who became a British subject in 1938 and worked at the London School of Economics. He believed that the state should not interfere with the free market, but rather focus on maintaining the rule of law. Hayek argues against collectivism, which is the ownership of land and the means of production by the people or the state as a political or principle or system. He felt that government intervening in the free market economy led to totalitarian rule. Totalitarianism is a concept for a form of government or political system that prohibits opposition parties, restricts individual opposition to the state and its claims. However, he did believe that the state had a role to play in creating a safety net, such as social insurance, national health service to support workers in times of need and unemployment. However, too much government intervention made problems worse and distorted the smooth running of the free market mechanism. So now we move to command economy. Command economy is when resources are allocated by the state or the government. Some small pockets of free market economies can exist. The government will ensure that wealth is distributed, therefore it leads to greater equality. Social welfare is the main concern of the state. Command economics do come with some disadvantages. Central planning imposes the will of a few on the whole. Less choice as planning produces uniform goods. There is no incentive to innovate due to lack of competition. Job security is high, so less incentive to work efficiently. And economic growth is slower than free market economies. An example of a command economy is Cuba or North Korea. So Karl Marx argued that free economies were inherently unequal and labour was exploited by capitalism. Labour was underpaid by the owners of the business. Okay, so now we move to command economy. Command economy is when resources are allocated by the state or the government. Some small pockets of free economies can exist. The government ensure that wealth is distributed and therefore this leads to greater equality. Social welfare is the main concern of the state. Command economies do come with some disadvantages. Central planning imposes the will of a few on the whole. Less choice as planning produces uniform goods. There is no incentive to innovate due to lack of competition. Job security is high, so less incentive to work efficiently. And economic growth is slower than free market economies. Examples of command economies are Cuba and North Korea. Okay, so Karl Marx is an economist that you need to know about. He was born in 1818 and died in 1883. He was a German economist who believed that labour was exploited by capitalists. In his book in 1867, Das Kapital, he suggested that labour was underpaid by the owners of the business. He argued that free economies were inherently unequal and labour was exploited by capitalism. Labour was underpaid by the owners of the business. So his works have had a massive impact on history, and ultimately socialist and communist republics have been born out of his works. So Marx had very opposing views to Hayek and Adam Smith. He believed that the exploitation of labour by capitalism would lead to a class struggle that would ultimately lead to the destruction of capitalism. As a result, communism would be born out of socialism. Under communism, there is no such thing as private property. All property is communally owned, and each person receives a portion based on what they need. A strong central government, the state, controls all aspects of economic production and provides citizens with their basic necessities, including food, housing, medical care and education. By contrast, under socialism, individuals can still own property, but industrial production, or the chief means of generating wealth, is communally owned and managed by a democratically elected government. So after looking at free market economies and command economies, we now look at the combination of the two. So as in free markets, enterprise is actively encouraged. However, the government will act to do the following. So one is to reduce negative externalities, which is, well, they exist when the production or consumption of a product results in a cost to a third party, and air and noise pollution are good examples of this. So providing public goods, a public good basically comes under two categories, or has two characteristics, I should say. Non-rivalry, which means that when a good is consumed, it doesn't reduce the amount available for others. So for example, a street light, when one person benefits from it, so does everyone else. However, something like an apple, eating an apple would, once it's gone, and so other people can't benefit from it. The other characteristic is that non-excludability. This occurs when it's not possible to provide a good without it being possible for others to enjoy. So an example of that is building a dam. Now, if you erect a dam to stop flooding, everyone will benefit from this, whether they've contributed to the flooding defences or not. A public good is often underprovided in a free market because its characteristics of non-rivalry and non-excludability mean there is no incentive an incentive not to pay. So in a free market, firms may not provide the good as they have difficulty charging people for their use. So the last thing there, we talked about good demerit goods before, about things like cigarettes or similar, and a demerit good is basically defined as a good that can have a negative impact on the consumer, but these damaging effects may be unknown or ignored by the consumer. So supplying merit goods, an example of merit good would be health services, contraception, education, work training programs, public libraries, museums, all those sorts of things, citizen advice bureau, inoculations for children. Yeah, and that's pretty much it for that slide. Okay, so what is the role of the state in a mixed economy? So as you've got a list here, providing public goods, for example, infrastructure and defence. We've talked about public goods a little bit more on the previous slide. Control macroeconomic variables, so inflation, making sure that interest rates are set appropriately and making sure that inflation doesn't go too high. Reducing negative externalities, as we discussed previously. Providing legal frameworks, an example there obviously is intellectual property rights. Also encouraging free trade, restricting monopoly power. I think an example of that is when I think two big supermarkets tried to join together. I believe it was Sainsbury's and Asda, although I'll be honest, I can't remember exactly which two. And obviously, if the market share of those supermarkets became too high, then they would start having a kind of a monopoly power, and therefore the state's role in this would be to stop that from happening by inflicting certain laws. Also to regulate markets and to make sure that consumers aren't exploited, and to create competition, something that comes from free markets anyway. Okay, so that brings us to the end of the lesson, and therefore back to our destination questions. So if you would stop the video and have a go at, first of all, writing down the questions and then writing down your destination answer. Thank you very much.